When King Abdullah visits Washington, there will be a number of issues on the agenda of importance to both the United States and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. First and foremost, this will include the Middle East peace process, as well as the Iranian nuclear program. Other issues will include Saudi Arabia's increasing prominence in the region and its greater regional role in a number of areas, including Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, among others. The United States will also be keen to talk about bilateral investments, especially direct American investments in the kingdom. And this will also be an opportunity for both sides to reaffirm the importance of the relationship and for the Americans to continue developing this relationship. Relations between the United States and Saudi Arabia are very strong and have been strong for 50+ years. The two see eye to eye on most international issues and agree most often on issues regionally or larger in the international arena. However, internal Saudi Arabia, the two at times disagree. There have been a number of high-level visits back and forth in recent months and over the course of the past year, including a number of very high-level American visitors to the kingdom. And the Obama administration is keen to develop Saudi Arabia as a greater actor to advance some of the issues that the Obama administration would like to see in the Arab and Muslim world. There are several issues that the United States is eager to get Saudi Arabia to be more active and proactive with, in line with what the American administration would like to see. This includes energy policy and oil production, includes stabilization in the energy markets, it includes taking a leadership with regards to the peace process, and in communicating with the Palestinian leadership as well as other Arab states, including Syria. Moreover, the United States would like to see the kingdom take a much more active role in Afghanistan in persuading different Afghan factions to come to the table and to seek accommodation. Saudi Arabia is a very well-established and stable society and government. Over the years, there have been many people who have predicted the downfall of the Saudi government. However, in the end, the government has always outlasted all its critics. And what we see King Abdullah doing is working to solidify and institutionalize this stability, which, above all other things, is what Saudi officials aim for: stability. Saudi society has evolved considerably since Abdullah assumed the throne several years ago. In a number of areas, King Abdullah has overseen the efforts by the central government to establish more control over the government. And these should not be confused with reforms. These are about bureaucratizing the state and institutionalizing the state. These include establishing a defined process for secession, establishing the government's control over areas where they previously had not had much control, in education, in justice, in other family and private matters. The Saudi government has also sought to redefine its relationship with the religious establishment and further establish its control over aspects that it had little control over previously. This can be seen in a number of issues, including co-educational gender mixing in public, about having men and women in the same classroom, establishing education for girls, etc. And the last fall's opening of King Abdullah University is the most public and well-known of these efforts. In Saudi Arabia, there's a common misperception that the government of the kingdom does not do anything without the consent and approval of the religious establishment. Oftentimes you hear people say that the king or the government will not do anything unless they get approval and authorization from the ulama. In actuality, the government most times will do what it wants to do and then will get approval from the religious establishment. In a society where almost 80% of the population receives its employment from the state, the government is in a great position to influence events. And one way or another, most people work for the state. If you teach at a university, if you're a cleric who teaches at a university, if you're a cleric who works in a mosque, if you serve on a commission, one way or another, you receive your livelihood, most cases, from the state. And the state uses this to shape the opinions and to co-opt and control the religious establishment, the Sunni religious establishment. From the outside, Saudi Arabia can appear to be an incredibly static place where there's not much change and things don't happen. However, Saudi society is incredibly dynamic, and there are an awful lot of changes that are going on inside the country as they work through a number of issues related to education, the role of women, the role of religion, society, etc. A lot of this has to do with the fact that it's only within the last 80 years that this change has really happened in Saudi Arabia. So within such a compressed period of time, the kingdom is working through issues that in most other societies it takes hundreds of years to work out. As a result, you have, within living memory, incredible change from poverty and isolation to incredible petro wealth and access to just about anything. As society works through all of those issues, we see there's an awful lot of change and pressure on developments in the country. So access to education for girls and women, the role of religion in society, all of these issues are being worked out every day. It's only when you're inside Saudi Arabia are you really exposed to these. Outside, things look like they never change. One of King Abdullah's major efforts has been a program to send Saudis abroad for education. There are currently over 20,000 Saudis in the United States studying in colleges and universities. This is not only to get an education to come back to the kingdom, but it's also a program to expose Saudis to Western culture, to American culture, to English language, etc. One of the remarkable things about this program is that Saudis don't just come by themselves, especially female students. Female students will oftentimes bring other members of their family, as required by traditional Saudi family custom. What this does is not only bring the two countries closer together, but it serves to develop the kingdom and to broaden the horizons of Saudis who partake in these programs. Currently, there are more Saudis studying in this country today than there were before September 11th. Saudi Arabia has taken great strides to combat radicalization and extremism in recent years, including a wide-ranging soft counterterrorism program designed at undercutting the intellectual and ideological justifications for political violence, in addition to hard security measures to kill or capture wanted militants and extremists. This is a very large shift from how things had been several years ago during the height of the violence in Saudi Arabia beginning in 2003. Now the government is much more aware of the problem, is taking efforts to combat extremism and violence within society. These include programs in schools, in the education ministry, in the justice ministry, in mosques, in society at large, including a wide-ranging public communications program to explain the dangers of violence and militancy and extremism. There still remains issues that need to be addressed, including issues with the curriculum and other aspects. But looking at how far Saudi Arabia has come has been significant. While the Saudi government have taken great efforts to combat extremism and violence within the kingdom, as soon as the government lifts up its efforts, whether it's these soft counterterrorism programs or the law enforcement or security or military efforts, there is a great likelihood that violence will increase or militancy will increase. And over the years, there have been regular reports and announcements of arrests of individuals planning operations and attempting to engage in violence inside the kingdom. So Saudi officials often say that al-Qaeda and extremism have not been defeated in the kingdom, but they're under control. And that control needs to be maintained in order to ensure stability and security inside Saudi Arabia. The United States and Saudi Arabia enjoy a very close relationship when it comes to fighting terrorism and extremism. The two sides cooperate very closely, and American officials often remark that Saudi Arabia is one of its greatest partners when it comes to fighting terrorism. One of the major issues for American officials, however, is the issue of Terra Finance and the money that is collected for charitable purposes and others that leave the kingdom that goes off for militant causes around the world, in the region and larger. This is a very difficult issue because many in Saudi Arabia believe in charitable giving. Nonetheless, it's very difficult to track where this money goes. American officials are keen to press Saudi Arabia for greater control over this money. While September 11th brought home the reality of Islamist terrorism to the United States, it was not until several years later in 2003 when this happened in Saudi Arabia. It wasn't until violence occurred inside the kingdom directed against Saudi nationals and Saudi interests that Saudi officials began to make greater efforts towards combating terrorism, including Terra Finance. The two sides, the United States and Saudi Arabia, both recognize that Terra Finance is an issue. However, this remains a difficult issue in Saudi Arabia for a number of reasons, including the fact that the charitable giving in the kingdom is so important. Saudi Arabia is very influential in the region and has the potential to be even more influential as the country with the greatest petroleum reserves, one of the largest petroleum producers on a day-to-day average, the birthplace of Islam as the home of the two holy places. Saudi Arabia has an awful lot of influence and leverage and appeal that it can use throughout the region on a number of issues. Typically, Saudi Arabia and Saudi officials prefer for this to be under the radar and not in plain sight, whereas the United States oftentimes would like Saudi Arabia to be more proactive in doing things that match its international agenda. Saudi Arabia has a central role to play in a number of international issues, including stabilizing the international energy market, preventing price spikes, as well as international issues relating to the Middle East peace process, the rehabilitation of Syria, developments in Iraq, the future of Iran, developments in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So throughout the Arab world, but then the greater Muslim world, Saudi Arabia has a great role to play. Internationally, when it comes to economics, as the world's largest oil producer, Saudi Arabia has considerable influence as well. Saudi Arabia has the potential to be very influential when it comes to the Middle East peace process. As authors and instigators of the Arab Peace Plan, in which all Arab states would recognize Israel in exchange for certain concessions, Saudi Arabia has a lot of influence with the Palestinian community. The Saudis have also worked to encourage Palestinian reconciliation and bringing together various Palestinian parties, and is a great funder of the Palestinian government. In all likelihood, however, the United States and others overestimate Saudi Arabia's ability to influence events on the ground, and whether or not that the Palestinians would, in actuality, listen to what it is that the Saudis say. The Saudis can only offer so much. It's up to the Palestinians to follow through on a number of these issues. And the Saudis have often said that this is between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and the Saudis are there to support the Palestinians as they go through this process. There are two key security issues in the Gulf that are of concern to Saudi Arabia. The first is the role of Iran and the future of the Iranian nuclear program and the perception of Iranian ambitions in the region. The second is the future of Gulf security architecture after Iraq. And really that means what happens when the Americans leave Iraq, as eventually they will do, what will happen? Who will fill that vacuum? And I think there's a concern in Saudi Arabia that the Americans may be shy to be as assertive as they have been in the past, given the experience in Iraq. With regard to Iran, there's a great concern in Saudi Arabia about Iran's nuclear ambitions and intentions. While the Saudis are very eager to make the point that military solutions are not viable in the region, they're also very eager at the same time to express to the Americans that Iran cannot develop a nuclear weapon. That's not in the interest of peace and security in the region. Despite the unpopularity of American military operations in Iraq, Saudi Arabia does not want to see the United States either leave Iraq prematurely or leave the region. Current Gulf security architecture depends on an engaged United States, and there's a concern that that the United States may not be as involved in the future as they have been in the past. Another issue that will very likely be on the agenda when President Obama and King Abdullah meet is Yemen and the future of Yemen. Saudi Arabia sees Yemen as one of its greatest challenges. It is very keen to avoid what has been termed in Afghanistan on its southern border. Many Saudis look at Yemen as the source of an awful lot of problems. If it's instability, if it's terrorism, drugs, extremism, undocumented workers, etc. Late last year and early this year, Saudi Arabia was involved in a war on its southern border with Yemen, the first time in decades that Saudi Arabia had engaged in unilateral military operations. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, based in Yemen, had tried to assassinate Prince Mohammed bin Naif, the Saudi counterterrorism chief, as well as made a number of other threats and operations inside the kingdom. So Yemen, as it regards terrorism and security, will be a key issue for both sides. Looking forward, it'll be important for the United States to involve Saudi Arabia in any policy or strategy on Yemen going forward. Saudi Arabia will need to be central to any U.S. or larger international policy dealing with Yemen.